She stepped off the train with hope in her eyes and was shattered by four cruel words. You didn't say black. But what began as rejection turned into a revolution led by one woman, one truth, and a legacy no one could silence. This is not a love story. It's a story of justice, dignity, and how one voice transformed an entire town. When the train finally screeched to a stop at Cedar Ridge Station, it felt as if the sky itself had paused. Golden rays of sunset spilled over the old gravel platform. Amid the drifting dust, Lina Carter stepped down in a neatly pressed blue dress, a small bouquet trembling in her hand, bought from a roadside vendor just the day before. 3 weeks on the train, 6 months of heartfelt letters, and now this moment. She was about to meet the man who had promised her a new beginning. His name was Edgar Whitmore, a local store owner whose tender words had convinced Lina that love could transcend color. But when their eyes finally met, Lina saw something instantly, something wrong. Edgar's face went pale. His grip on the bouquet tightened as if it might crumble in his hand. He took a step back. No smile, no warmth. You're Lina Carter, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lina gave a small nod, her heart pounding wildly. Edgar's eyes darted across her skin as if it offended him. I didn't know you were. I didn't realize you were black. She didn't rage. She didn't tremble. She simply said, you never asked. The station around them seemed to freeze. Curious onlookers slowed their steps to catch a glimpse of the unfolding humiliation, a black woman elegantly dressed being cast aside like an unwanted parcel. In your letters, Edgar stammered, you wrote so well. I imagined something else. You could have warned me. Warned you. Lina's voice was soft but laced with steel. Warned you that my skin is dark, but my heart is just as capable of love, just as worthy of dignity. Edgar looked down, shame creeping up his neck. You don't understand. It's not just me. The town, the church, my customers, they'd never accept this. I can pay for your ticket back. You seem smart. I'm sure you'll understand. But Lina didn't understand, because what had just been shattered wasn't a relationship. It was her last piece of trust. Before Lina could reply, a voice rang out behind Edgar, deep, commanding, and sharp as lightning through still air. That's your solution, Edgar. Toss some money and pretend this woman's pain isn't yours to face. Edgar turned around abruptly. A tall man, sun-kissed and broad-shouldered, stepped forward with purpose. His clothes were simple but finely made, his presence unmistakable. He moved like a man used to respect but not dependent on it. His name was Julian Devereaux, owner of the largest estate on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. People whispered that a third of the town relied on his land to survive. Julian walked up to Lina, removing his hat with quiet grace. Forgive my intrusion, ma'am, but if you need a place to rest and gather your thoughts, my home is open to you. No conditions, no expectations, just dignity. Edgar's face turned red. This has nothing to do with you. Julian didn't even look at him. It does when I watch a man act like a coward in broad daylight. Lina stood frozen, heart thundering. Julian's sudden appearance felt like a storm she didn't know whether to run from or into. Her past had taught her that kindness from strangers often came with hidden strings. She lifted her chin, eyes steady. Thank you, but I can't accept charity. Not anymore. Not today. Julian nodded solemnly, no offense taken. You don't have to trust me. Just know that what you were given out there, he glanced at Edgar with disgust, was not kindness. And you deserve better. Murmurs rose among the watching crowd. Edgar shifted awkwardly as if the weight of his shame had finally settled on his shoulders. Lina looked at Julian again. There was no pity in his gaze, only something deeper. Respect, perhaps even recognition. I'm not taking your hand out, she said, voice firm, but I do need a place to breathe, because I have nowhere else to go. Julian gave a slight bow. Then allow me to offer you space. Not as a favor, but as your right. The carriage rolled away from the station, slowly, wheels creaking against the dirt road, carrying Lina and Julian towards something unknown. Lina sat stiffly, eyes on the dusty horizon, her hands gripping the handle of her worn trunk. Inside it all she had left of a life she was trying to escape. As the road curved through a canopy of trees, a sprawling Victorian mansion appeared like a mirage beyond the orchards and horse pastures. The Devereaux estate, once the playground of privilege, now the setting for a woman stripped of all illusion. Julian broke the silence. I don't know what brought you here, Lina, but if you'll allow it, this home can be a place where you start again on your terms." Lina didn't reply. Her gaze locked on the gates as they swung open slowly. Her heart carried bruises. Her pride carried scars. But as she crossed the threshold, one thing was certain. She wasn't stepping into safety. She was stepping into a reckoning she was finally ready to face. As the grand front doors opened, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a spine like steel stood waiting. "I'm Mrs. Mathis, housekeeper of the estate," she said, her voice crisp but not unkind. "The blue room has been prepared. Please follow me." Lina stepped cautiously into the mansion. The hardwood floors creaked softly beneath her heels. Golden sconces cast warm shadows on oil paintings and ancestral portraits. The walls whispered stories of a world not built for women like her. And yet, here she was. The blue room was elegance incarnate, four-poster bed draped in sheer curtains, a carved armoire, and a tall window overlooking lavender fields that swayed like waves. Everything was beautiful. Everything was foreign. Mrs. Mathis turned at the door. "Will you be needing supper?" "I'm not sure," Lina replied, her voice brittle. "Rest," the housekeeper said gently, then closed the door with quiet finality. Left alone, Lina sank onto the bed. Her hands trembled slightly. Tonight, no one was sending her away. But that didn't mean she belonged here. She was no longer standing in rejection, but she had yet to stand in her own worth. This room wasn't comfort, it was a question. Evening arrived, wrapped in golden lamplight. The dining room shimmered with understated wealth. Porcelain plates, starched linen, silver polished until it gleamed. But what struck Lina most was the absence of servants. It was just Julian seated at the far end of the long oak table, waiting quietly. When Lina entered, her posture wary, he stood and offered a slight nod. "You're not a guest here, Miss Carter," he said gently. "You're a person with dignity, and this house honors that." Dinner was warm, bread, roasted vegetables, and a simple corn soup. Nothing extravagant, but comforting in its sincerity. They ate mostly in silence until Julian broke it with a soft question. "Would you like to tell me your story?" Lina looked into her bowl, then up at him. "I was a teacher, literature and history, at a private school for girls of color in Boston. When the funding dried up, so did the doors of my future." Julian listened without interruption. "I thought Edgar was my second chance," she added quietly. "Turns out I was just a secret he never intended to keep." Julian's eyes didn't flinch. "Then maybe this place is where you stop being a secret and start becoming your whole self again." The next morning, Lina awoke to soft sunlight brushing across the window panes. Mrs. Mathis greeted her with calm efficiency. "Mr. Devereaux would like to know if you'd be interested in organizing the library." "It's rather disordered." Lina's heart skipped. A library wasn't just books, it was memory history, silence that whispered truths. She followed the corridor until a tall wooden door creaked open to reveal a sea of leather-bound volumes, dust-laced windows, and scattered boxes of old papers and maps. To anyone else, it was chaos. But to Lina, it was a treasure map. She rolled up her sleeves and began to work sorting, labeling, dusting. And then buried beneath a stack of forgotten ledgers, she found a worn folder marked Freeman Parcell, 1866. Her breath caught. She pulled it open to reveal maps, deeds, and signatures, her great-grandfather's name etched clearly beneath a state seal. Elijah Freeman. This was it. The land Cedar Ridge stood on had once belonged to her family. Land taken not by war, but by betrayal and silence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from awakening. She had come seeking refuge. Instead, she had found a reckoning meant for her hands alone. It didn't take long for the town to notice that Lina hadn't left. She'd become the subject of whispers behind lace curtains and judgmental glances from women passing by the estate gates. The town's silence wasn't neutral. It was sharp, heavy, and watching. One afternoon, Edgar Whitmore himself appeared at the estate, hat clutched in his hand, eyes sunken and guilt poorly disguised. "I just wanted to make sure Miss Carter is comfortable," he muttered. Julian didn't stand. He didn't even offer a handshake. "She's right here. You can ask her yourself." Lina stepped into the drawing room wearing a lavender dress that Mrs. Mathis had lovingly tailored. Her posture was regal, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted coolly. "What a surprise." The church committee is concerned," he fumbled. "An unmarried woman, living here, and well, a black woman." Julian finished, his voice low and dangerous. You can say it, Edgar flinches. Lina walked closer, her voice like silk drawn over steel. It's kind of the church to worry, but I'm afraid I'll be staying. Mr. Devereaux has offered me a position organizing the estate's library, and just like that, the man who had humiliated her was left speechless, outspoken, outranked, and undone. After that encounter, Lina no longer felt like a guest. She felt like a woman on a mission. She poured herself into the library's archives, cross-referencing land deeds, examining old tax records, searching through minutes from long-forgotten town meetings. The deeper she dug, the clearer the truth became. Much of Cedar Ridge, storefronts, homes, farms sat on land stolen from the Freeman family. But she didn't act in anger. She moved with precision, with purpose. Each night she stood by the library window, the moonlight brushing against her determined face. Julian often joined her, standing in respectful silence. "You're preparing for something," he finally said one evening. "I am," she replied, not looking away. "My great-grandfather was silenced with fear." "I won't be." Julian's voice was low. "Then I stand with you, whatever it takes." She smiled faintly, hand tightening around the old Freeman documents in her satchel. This wasn't just about land, it was about legacy. It wasn't just about the past. It was about who got to write the future. 2 weeks later, the Cedar Ridge Town Hall buzzed with tension. Its wooden benches were packed with town leaders, shop owners, and church elders. Whispers floated in the air like smoke before a storm. Edgar stood at the front, flushed and indignant. "She's disturbing the peace," he snapped. "Living in Mr. Devereaux's home without title or decency, and now digging through history like she has a claim to it." The murmurs swelled. Then the doors opened. Lina Carter stepped in, flanked by Julian. Her head was high, her presence undeniable. The room quieted to a hush so profound you could hear hearts thudding. "I'm not here to seek pity," Lina began, her voice clear. "I stand here as the legal heir of Elijah Freeman, a man granted this land by the state in 1806 only to be driven off by lies and fear." She opened her leather case and laid out original maps, deeds, and a signed gubernatorial order. The air turned electric. She hadn't come to confront one man. She had come to confront a legacy of silence, and for the first time, silence didn't win. Shock cracked through the room like thunder. "This is a lie," Edgar barked. "Forgery. She's not a lawyer. She has no authority." Lina didn't blink. She placed down one more file, a notarized power of attorney, and a verification letter from the State Historical Archives. "I don't need to be a lawyer," she said calmly. "I have the truth, and the law knows it too." Judge Halbrook adjusted his glasses, studying each document with growing solemnity. "These appear authentic," he muttered. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some faces turned pale. Others turned to stone. For generations, these families had lived comfortably on land they claimed was theirs. Now their foundations were cracking, not from dynamite, but from a woman's unwavering voice. Julian stood beside her, silent but resolute. Lina looked at the faces that once mocked her, now filled with fear. "I'm not here to burn your home," she said softly. "I'm here to expose the truth and to give this town a choice. Redemption or denial." And in that moment, history looked back and demanded an answer. Edgar's face contorted with rage. "So what do you want?" he spat. "You want to take everything from us? Leave us homeless? Destroy our families?" Lina's eyes did not waver. "No," she replied, her voice both tender and unshakable. "I want to rebuild what should have never been broken." She unfolded a proposal, the Freeman Foundation, a nonprofit that would repurpose profits from reclaimed land to fund education, public housing, health care, and scholarships for all residents, regardless of color. "Instead of retribution, I'm offering repair," she said, "because revenge builds nothing but justice can build a future." The room was still. Julian finally spoke. "Cedar Ridge was built on injustice, but it can rise on integrity. You have a chance right now to make things right." Some couldn't meet Lina's gaze, but others, former skeptics, nodded slowly, hesitantly, as if recognizing that truth once seen can't be unseen. She didn't demand, she invited. And for the first time, the people of Cedar Ridge realized the reckoning they feared was also the redemption they needed. The town meeting ended not with applause, but with silence. A kind of silence that follows earthquakes when the dust hasn't yet settled, but the world knows something has shifted for good. Days later, the town council voted to approve the Freeman Foundation. Funding was reallocated. Historical errors once buried in dusty archives were acknowledged in public record. Edgar Whitmore sold his shop at a fraction of its value and left town under the cover of dawn. No one stopped him. His store, once a monument to exclusion, was transformed into Cedar Ridge's first public library, free and open to all. Inside, behind the reference desk, a small framed photo of Elijah Freeman hangs quietly. No plaque, no marble, just a simple line beneath his name. He was silenced, but we still hear him. Julian visited one afternoon and found Lina reading poetry to children, her voice warm and sure. He stood at the door, not saying a word. He didn't have to. He knew this was no longer just her victory. It was the town's rebirth. 6 months later, Lina and Julian married beneath the apple trees on the edge of the Devereaux estate, where the lavender fields meet the open sky. It wasn't grand, but it was sacred. No elaborate gowns, no high society spectacle. Just friends, children, elders, and neighbors once divided, now bound by quiet admiration. Pastor Alden, who once avoided eye contact with Lina, now stood before them with watery eyes. "We are not just here to witness a marriage," he said. "We are here to witness what healing looks like." Lina took Julian's hands in hers. She wasn't the woman who had arrived at the station with a crushed bouquet and trembling hope. She was the woman who uncovered truth, demanded dignity, and rebuilt a town with grace instead of fury. After the vows, they walked through the community center that once stood on disputed land. Children's laughter echoed through its halls. Julian turned to her, smiling softly. "You know what's ironic? Edgar left because he couldn't accept you. But your truth is what saved this place." Lina leaned in, whispering, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stays and refuses to leave." Autumn swept through Cedar Ridge like a quiet hymn, crisp air, golden leaves, the scent of ripened apples drifting through town. But this year, the season wasn't just changing the trees. It was changing the people. At the far end of town, the land that had once been labeled worthless, neglected, and forgotten was now the site of something precious: the Elijah Freeman Elementary School. Children of every color, every background, now ran through its hallways, laughing freely beneath banners that read, "Truth is a seed." Inside, Lina taught literature on Thursdays. Standing in front of a chalkboard, she watched eyes light up with wonder, not because of her past, but because of the hope she now embodied. Julian often met her after class, waiting with warm cider and a knowing smile. One afternoon, as children played behind them, he whispered, "I thought I built this estate with my hands. But you built something far greater." Lina turned to him, eyes glistening. "I didn't come to destroy Cedar Ridge," she said. "I came to help it remember who it could be." In the rustle of falling leaves, a new kind of promise settled into the earth, one no storm could uproot. But not everyone celebrated the change. One morning, the glass doors of the library were shattered. Spray painted across the walls in jagged red letters, "Thief." Lina arrived before sunrise, her breath fogging in the cold air. A police officer shrugged, disinterested. "Probably kids. Nothing serious." Julian stood beside her, jaw clenched. He said nothing, just grabbed a cloth and began wiping the pain away, stroke by silent stroke. Later that night, Lina brought him a blanket and a cup of coffee. He hadn't moved from the steps. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "I am," she whispered. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if we let lies win." The next day, instead of replacing the broken window, Julian installed a brass plaque in its place. It read, "The truth can be defaced but never erased." No one dared deface the building again. And in that quiet defiance, the town learned, even in the face of hate, dignity can stand taller than fear. Weeks later, a thin, weary man stood outside the library at dusk. Lina knew him the moment she saw the slump in his shoulders: Edgar Whitmore. His once puffed chest had deflated, his pride cracked beyond repair. He didn't knock. He just stood there, eyes locked on the building that used to bear his name, now reborn with truth and grace. Lina stepped outside. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he handed her an envelope. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a letter, handwritten and trembling. "I built my life on fear. You built yours on truth. I see that now. I was wrong. And I am sorry, not for what I lost, but for what I never had the courage to become." Lina folded the paper gently. "What did he say?" Julian asked that evening. "He didn't apologize with words," she said. "He apologized with surrender. Not every villain becomes a hero, But sometimes even the fallen learn to lower their eyes and in doing so, open a door that was once bolted shut. A month later, the town gathered in the newly built Freeman Community Park. No marble statues, no grand podiums, just a simple bronze plaque set into a stone beneath a maple tree. This land was taken. Now it gives. In memory of Elijah Freeman. Lina stood before it, hands clasped, the autumn wind tugging at her coat. Around her stood generations of townspeople, many of whose families had once tried to bury the name she now honored. My great-grandfather worked this soil with his bare hands, she said softly. He was promised freedom, but found silence. Today we break that silence not to shame, but to build something better. Some cried, some stood with bowed heads, and some for the first time saw the name Freeman, not as a burden, but as a bridge. That night, as lights flickered across the park and children played tag under lamplight, Lina whispered into the wind, "You're not forgotten, grandfather. You're finally home." Years passed, children grew up reciting Elijah Freeman's name in history class. The Freeman Foundation funded college scholarships, rebuilt clinics, and turned forgotten lots into gardens. And Lina, she became something larger than legend. She became the soul of a town reborn. One day, a young girl raised her hand in class. "Miss Carter," she asked, "how did you change everything?" Lina smiled, brushing chalk dust from her skirt. "I didn't change everything, sweetheart. I just refused to leave it the way I found it." Later, as she walked past the library, past the school, past the courthouse where she once stood with shaking hands, she met Julian under the old oak tree. "You're not the woman who was rejected on a train platform anymore," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm the woman who turned rejection into a foundation, who proved that truth even when buried still grows." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting light over the town, she rebuilt Lina. Carter knew that justice didn't roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispered like wind in the trees. But when it comes, it stays. A year passed. The Freeman Elementary School was no longer just new. It was the heart of Cedar Ridge. Its hallways echoed with laughter, its walls adorned with drawings of unity and stories of justice. But it was one classroom in particular that always felt like the sun had chosen to settle there. Lina Carter's classroom. She taught history, real history, the kind not found in sanitized textbooks, but lived in the shadows of silence for far too long. One afternoon, she stood by the chalkboard as the late light of day poured through the windows. Her students looked up with wide eyes hanging on her every word. "Do you know why you're sitting here?" she asked softly. A small girl in the front row, brown-skinned, curious, raised her hand. "Because someone told the truth, Miss Carter." Lina smiled, a heart swelling, not with pride, but with fulfillment, with peace. She wasn't here to be celebrated. She was here to remind these children they didn't come from silence. They came from courage, from roots that ran deeper than shame and stronger than fear. In that room, surrounded by young minds, a new generation was already rising. News of Cedar Ridge's transformation spread beyond county lines. Journalists, professors, and even lawmakers began visiting, eager to learn how one woman had turned rejection into revival. One day during a televised interview, a reporter leaned forward and asked, "If you could go back to that train platform, would you still step off the train?" Lina didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, eyes clear. "Even knowing what would come after, I would step off again. Because the pain was real, but so was the purpose." The reporter pressed further. "And why didn't you retaliate? Why didn't you take it all back?" Lina looked straight into the camera. "Because justice isn't revenge. Justice is restoration. I didn't come to take Cedar Ridge. I came to help it remember who it was supposed to be." Her words were quoted in newspapers, speeches, and classrooms. But to Lina, the only audience that mattered were the students she saw each week. Because when they repeated her words not from memory, but from belief, that's when she knew the truth had finally found a home. That fall, the town gathered for a special ceremony in the community center. No longer a place of old-world elitism, but one of shared history and hope. The event was simple, but its meaning monumental. Lina Carter was being honored as Cedar Ridge's first recipient of the Legacy of Justice Award. Not because she demanded it, but because no one else could deny it. One by one, townspeople stepped forward, people who once doubted her, once feared her presence, and told stories of how she had changed their hearts. And then Julian approached the podium. No speech, no fanfare, just an old photograph in a silver frame, Elijah Freeman, his gaze steady across time. This is the man who sowed the seed, Julian said. And Lina, you brought the rain. Applause thundered through the hall. Lina didn't speak that night. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in its history, Cedar Ridge chose to listen. One crisp afternoon, Lina and Julian walked through the fields that had once divided the town by blood, now stitched back together by truth. Lavender bloomed again, and children ran barefoot across the same soil that had once been fought over in silence. Julian stopped and looked around. Do you think any of this would have happened if you never stepped off that train? Lina turned to him. Maybe. Someday. But not like this. Not with this kind of beauty. They paused beneath the old oak tree, the same one where Elijah Freeman had planted roots that outlasted chains. A soft breeze blew through the branches, and Lina whispered, I didn't just find justice here. I found home. He took her hand, their fingers threading like pages in a shared book. You didn't just change Cedar Ridge, he said. You reminded it that it could be whole. Above them, the sky stretched wide. And beneath their feet, the land no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to everyone. Years later, in a brightly lit classroom with sky blue walls, a young student raised her hand. Miss, is the story of Lina Carter real? The teacher smiled. Her hair was gray now, but her spirit still burned gold. Yes, she said softly. She was once like you. A girl with a voice no one wanted to hear. The children leaned in. She was turned away, laughed at, but she didn't leave. She stayed, and she spoke. And because of her, our town is what it is today. Outside the window, the Lina Carter Public Library stood tall beside the Elijah Freeman Community Garden. Flowers bloomed where silence once choked the earth. Back inside, the teacher added, Justice isn't just about laws. It's about memory. It's about who we choose to honor. And then she looked at her students. And who we choose to become. Because Lina's story wasn't a tragedy. It was a blueprint of what happens when one woman dares to stand in the light when others are still hiding in the shade. And like the trees Elijah once planted, her legacy was still growing. True justice isn't about taking power. It's about restoring what should have never been stolen. When Lina was rejected, she could have walked away. But she stood firm, not out of vengeance, but out of vision. Her story teaches us that courage doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly through patience, wisdom, and unshakable self-respect.